I'm Dan Drake. Welcome to Visitor Network TV. Our guest today is Rick Atherton, the chairman of the Board of Selectmen. Welcome, Rick.
Thanks, Dan.
I'd love to talk to you about what you see as the principal goals and objectives of the town and the board as it goes forward under your leadership once again. And also, I'm going to ask you the same question that I've asked the other selectmen who have been on about whether you think our form of government works today. But let's get back to that.
I know the latter one is one of your interests, Dan.
It is. That's true. But what do you see as the principal objectives of the town and the board at this point?
Well, I think, over the past several years, we've had maybe three major sort of goals and areas. One has been the finance department, and we now have an audit that's complete and unqualified. That's a change from what we had maybe starting 5 or 6 years ago for several years in a row. So that, and that's an activity that ought to be a regular routine accomplishment. And I don't think it doesn't have to be a continued goal to have an unqualified audit. But we do have to continue to improve our financial reporting. We've had the enterprise funds report to the board and the community via television. I think we're working hard with the finance committee to make sure our sort of budgeting mechanisms and the paperwork involved, it's an it's an expansive process, is getting sort of more qualified. And as we have grown over the past 10 years, we need a better summarization and presentation. So that's been an ongoing goal.
And there's been some work on that by Selectman Miller and David
Well, there
Worth
have
on
been
the FinCom.
David Worth on the FinCom. They just had a meeting, another meeting yesterday to bring the enterprise fund idea back to the town as a whole. So I think that's a very productive development that we're having there. Another overall goal we've had for several years is the space needs issues. And last year we saw, for example, the fire station can't come up again. We have to make some long-term community decisions about our commitment to whether or not our employee base should move back downtown. That was a bylaw. We've had a temporary move of folks to 2 fairgrounds. We now have the police station out of town, but there's still a number of departments that could be back downtown if we're willing to make that commitment. It will take a significant, I think, renovation or planning effort to accomplish that. And so a major goal, I think, of the board is to try and develop a process to bring a resolution or a recommendation to town meeting on that. The other sort of arching goal we've had for several years is water quality, and that also takes you back into the sewer and extension of the sewer districts. We're spending, I hate to think how much, Dan, we have a $700,000 contract to update the comprehensive wastewater plan. And hopefully out of that process, we'll get some recommendations on the funding for extension of the sewer system, if that's determined to be necessary. We may get some reconfiguration options on the existing financing methods and how we're paying for the Surfside and the Sconset wastewater treatment facilities. There's a program in place right now, but not everybody's comfortable with that. We have to deal with our fertilizer regulations and the practical implementation of that, which is a major determinant of nutrients going into our harbors. So all of those sort of water quality issues, those I see are the 3 main goals, Dan.
Certainly the second 2 of those 3 potentially involve significant expenditures on the part of the town.
They do, and let's take the third one. It's interesting. The assumption 2 years ago was that 3 years ago, all of Mattocket may have to be sewered, all of Monomoy and Shimo might have to be sewered. After we did some modeling with UMass Dartmouth, the mix has changed. It's not as clear that sewering is the only solution. Dealing with nitrogen from fertilizer, for example, may be a solution. The indications of sewering in Mattocket, as I assume you're pretty well aware of, is that it may well be the preferred option, but for a smaller section of the neighborhood there rather than the fully expanded one. So all of those impact the cost. Not that there won't be cost, but it may not be of the same magnitude we've talked about in the past.
But if you sewer a smaller area, it also makes the cost per connection a lot higher.
Well, it does in the sense if you're still going to use for example, one of the options now in Mattocket is whether or not instead of having a whole plant out on that end of the island, as we do in Sconset, but to think about whether or not we can run a pipe from Mattocket back through some path to get to the Surfside facility. But that takes you back, and you've got to do a fair amount of analysis to make sure you have the capacity and how many additional connections are you going to bring that were not planned in the original capacity. So,
and you also have the flip side of that, I gather, is with the Sconset plant, it's way underutilized most of the year.
Well, right, and we have a very seasonal.
But also getting it up to speed from a operational standpoint is difficult and takes more time than sort of the difference between May 15th and Memorial Day.
It does, and whether the bugs are working right and all that kind of stuff. That's why we had a nice presentation by David Gray, and using the output from the brewery to help in that process. And all of that's great, but the plant in Sconset's been working now for 10 years. So I think hopefully we've got it down. So it's maybe difficult, but it's not a real problem.
The whole issue of whether this is a good form of government for the town at this point, as you pointed out, is an issue that I've asked people about. I have a concern about. What do you think? Do you think, basically, unless we have special town meeting, there's one legislative meeting a year, one or 2 days, and that's the only time anything of significance can happen. Is that?
I tend to be a bit of a traditionalist here. I find the open town meeting, we're a different community than we were 20, 100 years ago or 200 years ago.
Or even 50 years ago.
Or whatever period of time you want to pick. But I do find that it's a sort of the ultimate democracy. And, during the off season, well, we may have 60,000 during the season. During the off season, we have 10 to 15, depending on who's counting and how many people you count. I think it's manageable. We may get to where we have 2 town meetings, an annual and a special. And there are specific items people can say that runs into a time problem if you can't meet. But, I've been at this long enough, Dan, to see that that's not as significant an impediment as others, and maybe you might think. It may be more the question some people feel because the attendance always can be low, and that's a small percentage of the voting population, if you will. But on the other hand, if you change the form, it'll be an even smaller percentage. If you have a council or representative government and 10 to 15 people serving.
In theory, they represent everybody.
Well, in theory, those who show up represent everybody. The people who turn out to vote for the people you're talking about, if you have a council form of government, the number of voters is 25 to 30%?
But it's a lot higher than show up at town meeting.
It is higher, but people show up when they want to show up, okay? And I think we've seen that in a number of examples. When an issue is important, the citizens turn out. So, again, I'm not quite ready to
surrender yet.
No, I'm not. I don't think it's as broken as some people feel. Maybe a way to deal with that is to pick out the specific examples that you or others feel have really been degraded by the process, other than those who choose to show up. Because to me, that's the citizen's choice, Dan.